So a recent vlog comment was like, Fritz, is that a Mackie that you're playing? The first battle mech? And why, yes, it is. And I have a Mackie in my collection, and it's the Mackie Prime. It's not been updated. In my mercenary company, the narrative was this mech was inherited, and it was literally passed down through the line, passed through the generations. And I completely play it for the narrative. It's like a grown-up urban mech. There are better mechs out there. The configuration of the Mackie is nothing that is like super, wow, I need to play it for some reason. But in playing it, it has some primitive functions. And that's going to lead us into playing primitive battle mechs. Why would you want to do that? What is it? And how does it pull in? So the great thing about Battletech is you can start out as simple as possible and then branch out. For a number of years, I just played mechs versus mechs. But then you can add in vehicles, and you can add in design quirks. So you read through the tech manuals, and what's interesting about Battletech is you realize that these machines, these battle mechs, they are very flawed. You know, the idea is sometimes as an engineer, they had to make concessions, or they had to design something on the fly in the moment. Or it's just like, look, we got to move units. How can we cut corners? How can we keep it cheap? Or you realize some of the components just on the design will, like literally slabs of armor, fall off for some reason, or shear off, and you got to kind of protect them. So to reflect that in the rules, it's optional, this idea of design quirks. They make things a little bit different. You know, a great example, the Banshee is supposed to look really, really fearsome, and that's how it's designed. So it has that design quirk, which gives you some bonuses against other mech warriors. So when we get into the primitive design, there's this idea that some of the early mechs, the really early mechs, like the Shadowhawk, the Mackie, mechs that have been in production forever, they have this primitive design. At the time, the components, the engine, the fusion engines, the armor, potentially the weapons, were top shelf, were top of the line. But as battle mechs evolved, their components were upgraded. Now, in the case of the Shadowhawk, that was upgraded along, and the way we see the Shadowhawk today, it is a standard battle mech. The one we're looking at now is actually a primitive design. So you see the armor's a little bit different. When you play a primitive mech, the battle value is adjusted, but they don't have as much armor, or you're going to see the engine slots take up greater space. Sometimes they occupy the entire torso section, so now you're just literally like one gigantic center torso, and there's other quirks working against it. So why would you ever play these mechs? I do play them sometimes, simply based on the narrative. If I'm playing a mercenary company or a mech warrior that is literally been handed this for generations and generations, or perhaps, look, a mech warrior that got lucky, did the Millennium Falcon type thing, won the hand, and they won a battle mech, and it's this like really, really old battle mech. Or possibly, the Inner Sphere is a big place. You could be a mech warrior, which has great standing, literally Knights of the Realm, but you're on some backwater planet, and you've got a primitive mech, and you've been there for multiple generations. So there are places within the narrative. Now, with these primitive mechs, the visuals, there's nothing stopping me from taking my Shadowhawk primitive and just saying, well, it's a regular Shadowhawk, or downgrading your Shadowhawk to a primitive. Within the rules, WYSIWYG, what you see is what you get. You could go either way. But I do have a few multiples in my collection, the standard and the primitive. So that's the pushing out the narrative. Tactically, if we're just going pure meta, there's no reason to ever play a primitive mech. It's just that. I guess it would be like, it wouldn't be like a World War II tank versus a modern tank, but it might be like a tank from the 60s or 70s going against today. There's a lot of disadvantages to it, but at the same time, look, it's still a mech. It's still got bite. It still is high tech and pushing that forward.